Well, folks are still trickling in here, but I think I'm going to go ahead and kick things off because we're going to do a tiny little bit of front matter here. So yes, welcome to our 2021 Sportsmen's Forum, our webinar edition. Today is the final of four webinars. They've been stellar so far, so I'm really excited that y'all are here to join us today for this one. Everyone, I think, should already be muted. Everyone's video off as well. Just to kind of make things kind of nice and smooth on our end. But please do go ahead and reach out in the chat. It'd be excellent if you have any questions or anything throughout the entire day, or session, if you want to go ahead and put those in the chat, and then we'll have plenty of time to discuss later. Okay, so first and foremost, kind of who are we? What are we doing? So we are the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. We cover the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed here from New York all the way down to Virginia. This is actually our 50th year. So we started as an organization right around that, early environmental movement in the late 60s, early 70s. And we've been going strong ever since, working on repairing our entire watershed, which will, then in turn repair the bay itself. I am calling here out of our Lancaster, PA office. We also have offices. Our headquarters is in Annapolis. We have an office in DC, and we also have an office in Richmond. And then we have folks scattered throughout, additionally, in more remote offices. So I am our forest program manager here in Pennsylvania. That is just one of the four big pillars of our work. So forest, green infrastructure, agriculture, and then stewardship and engagement. All of them are critical pillars of getting this done, of repairing our watershed. And we're really excited to be able to have programs around all these in all of those locations. So if any of that interests anybody, definitely, feel free to reach out in the chat. Stay in touch with us, and we'll be kind of talking a little bit more about ways to stay involved with the Alliance if you'd like to. And I think you should. We're a pretty good organization. Okay, so enough about us, enough about me. Let's talk about deer and introduce our wonderful speakers. We have here, we're going to start with Bret Wallingford, who is our deer biologist with Pennsylvania Game Commission up here in Pennsylvania in the Bureau of Wildlife Management, Deer and Elk Section. And then we're going to go down south of the Mason-Dixon to Brian Eyler, who is the Mammal Section Leader, Wildlife and Heritage Service at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Bret, if you could go ahead and share yours, and looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, I'm trying to get here from this. Okay, is everybody seeing that screen?
Perfect. Thanks, Bret.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Bret Wallingford. I'm a deer biologist at the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Just to give you a little bit about the program tonight, I'm going to talk about is the Pennsylvania's deer management program. I'm just going to give you an overview. It's very, very deep, very in depth, but I'm gonna try to keep it moving so it doesn't get. Hopefully, it's not going to get boring. To give you an explanation of what we do here for deer management in Pennsylvania. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania in Monroe County. I went to undergraduate school at Penn State. Got a degree in environmental resource management, and then that was in 1985, and then I went down to North Carolina State University and worked on a master's degree. I got that in 1990, and I started with the Pennsylvania Game Commission in July of 1990. So I am working on 32 years now with the Game Commission. I started with pheasants, but in 1995 we made some personnel changes, and I asked to go over to deer management. A lot of people would say you foolishly asked to go over to deer management because of all the controversy that there is. But I've been I've been embroiled in that ever since for the last 27 years. We began doing some research back in 2000. When we got into one of the research projects, I was able to utilize some of that research to pursue a Ph.D. program at Penn State University, and I worked on that for 11 long years and received that in 2012. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about Pennsylvania's deer management program. Deer management's a balancing act between good and bad things that are associated with deer. The challenge is how do we achieve that balance? People are real passionate about deer. Human perceptions define wildlife conflicts and tolerance. So here are some hypothetical curves to demonstrate this. Farmers may appreciate seeing deer, but not if it starts to impact their profits. For example, at a vegetable farm where they can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Homeowners may want to see deer, but they become intolerant once levels get too high. For example, with deer eating their landscape, vehicle collisions around their place. For hunters, as expected, tolerance tends to be much higher than what other stakeholders are okay with, and also what a forest can support. Every stakeholder group has a different tolerance level, and balancing all of these is nearly impossible. But we do have tools to address deer issues at localized scales to help with this balance, such as our Deer Management Assistance Program. And there are other programs that are available for agriculture, programs that are designed to allow them to address deer on this localized level. The Game Commission here in Pennsylvania has publicly identified and supported deer management goals, which guided us in our antlerless license allocation recommendations, which ultimately are used to manage the deer populations within each wildlife management unit. So these goals include healthy and sustainable deer population, acceptable levels of deer-human conflict, a healthy and sustainable forest habitat, to provide recreational opportunities, and to improve and disseminate information and education about deer. These goals are supported by both Pennsylvania hunters and the broader public in Pennsylvania. The state is broken down into 23 wildlife management units, which I'll often call WMU, that we use to manage deer. County units were too small to collect adequate data, and they're based on political boundaries. So a number of years ago, we went to these different units so that they are not political in nature. They've got defined boundaries and things like that. They contain similar habitats, similar human populations, public land areas, and then we tried to tie everything into physiographic units. So, for example, all the ones would be in one physiographic unit, all the twos would be in another, etc. So these are small enough to break up a unit break up the state into meaningful units, but yet they're big enough to meet sample size requirements that we need for managing. Boundaries are also more identifiable to the public and law enforcement than typical county boundaries, because most often they are either rivers or some type of hardtop road. Deer management goals and data determine our deer population objective for each of our WMUs. The goal for managing deer for a sustainable population, here we look at fawn to doe ratios in the harvest, population trends, and the presence of CWD and free-ranging deer in each of our units. For the goal of managing deer for sustainable forests, we look at data on forest regeneration and deer forest impacts, and this is information that's collected by the U.S. Forest Service. And for the goal of acceptable deer-human conflicts, we ask in a survey how many deer do people want, and we use data that's collected by a third-party survey company. So all told, in each given year, we look at about 750,000 data points that we use and work through a defined process to determine if goals are being met and to determine if deer population objectives, whether to increase, decrease, or stabilize the population, is being met in each of our units. Deer management recommendations are based on a defined process. First, we evaluate if deer management goals are being met in each of our WMUs. Then we determine deer management objectives in each unit, whether to increase, decrease, or stabilize. Once the population objectives are identified, we then determine the number of antlerless deer to be harvested to meet that objective, because antlerless harvest, more specifically on the female side, the females themselves, they have the greatest effect on the deer population. And finally, we determine how many antlerless licenses are needed to be allocated in each of our wildlife management units. And here we factor in and we measure each year success rates with each of our in each of our units. We have 32 teams. There are 2 to 3 people per team. We visit around 400 to 420 deer processors over a 6 to 7 day period. And during this time, we age over 25,000 deer. The age data is used to determine the age structure of the harvest and come up with population estimates. And in monitoring the age structure on the buck side is a very important part of this sampling. To calculate the fawn to doe ratios, we look at that information to determine whether we've got a reproductive and healthy deer herd. And then we use the age data in modeling to look at population trends using population estimates. And just in case you're wondering, this picture here in the middle is my former supervisor, Dr. Chris Rosenberry. He has moved up a level now. So David Stainbrook is the leader of the section now. And I also want to mention that Janine Flegel is another member of the deer part of the deer and elk section. But most of the other employees are older than this one that's standing next to Chris. That's Chris's son. He's now a freshman in college, towers over Chris, and is playing on the Grove City football team. We use tag information that we get from the ear tags to calculate a reporting rate. So we look at how many of those 25,000 or so that we look at, how many of those are being reported by hunters. And we break everything down by unit. The reporting rates are then used to estimate the harvest. And we also collect to get a sample of heads that we then use to collect CWD samples. So how are we doing as a state? Deer populations are stable in most of the units. This it's the light green is actually kind of a grayish color on mine. So WMUs 2F, 2H, and 3D are decreasing they're increasing, those dark green ones. 4B is decreasing. That's in population. Although we've detected a decline in the fawn to adult does in the harvest data in some of our units, that's the part that's shown in the angled black lines. We do not see it affecting population trends at this time. So all these units have what we are calling a stable deer population, with the exception of unit 4B, which has a decreasing population trend. And that's by design because the objective was to reduce deer numbers because of CWD. Regarding CWD, our deer plan objective is to reduce deer numbers in all WMUs where CWD has been detected in wild deer. That's the areas in red in the map. Now, this is a little bit out of date because we do have, I don't know if I have a cursor here, we do have a little bit more that's occurring in here and also up in this area right up in here. I'll talk about that just a little bit later. Lowering deer populations in these WMUs is a critical step to decrease the disease risk and spread of chronic wasting disease. We rely on regeneration data from the U.S. Forest Service and what is called forest inventory and analysis plots, or FIA plots. They also collect more detailed information such as deer impacts and on a subset of these plots each year. So, and what we use here as tree species, they are species that are considered dominants and high canopy. They are both desirable and not desirable from a forestry standpoint. So we were looking at anything that is going to make canopy cover when we were looking at tree regeneration. We're actively working on solutions to more robust measures of deer impacts at the unit scale. And we're working with Penn State and Department of Conservation of Natural Resources in our state on a research program that's called the Deer Forest Study. When we're hoping that this is going to be a long-term study. We're in about 8 years now. We're looking probably at considerably longer to try and get an understanding of these measures. Forest regeneration and deer impacts vary across the state, but in general, most WMUs are considered good to fair for regeneration. That's the one here on the left. And at acceptable levels of forest impact, the one on the right. Again, these measures are collected by the U.S. Forest Service. Forest regeneration is considered good in over and what we consider good is over 70% of the plots in that unit have adequate regeneration. So it's considered good. It's only considered good in those 4 units. 1A, 2F, 3B, and 4A. In WMU 2A, down in the lower left, forest regeneration was considered to be poor, and that means that less than 50% of the plots have adequate regeneration. Forest regeneration is only considered fair in the remaining WMUs, and that means it's between 50 and 70%. Not real good if you're looking at it from a forestry standpoint, but that's what those are the measures that we're looking at. Deer forest impacts were considered acceptable. That's the map on the right. In all units except for 3D and 4E, where deer impacts are considered to be too high. Although unit WMU 2A over here on this left-hand map, it has poor regeneration. Deer impacts, based on the measures that we have, were not considered to be too high, at least not at this time. Again, I want to emphasize all these measures are taken each year, and units do change, and we try to adjust our management based on those changes. So the next question then is, involves deer-human conflict. Is the deer population too high, too low, or about right? And for that, we use a group called Responsive Management. It's a survey company down in Virginia that does a lot of work with state agencies, and we conduct a survey of our residents using Responsive Management. Most residents, the latest survey that we did was in 2019. We do them every 3 years, so in 2022 we'll be doing another one. Most residents consider the deer population to be just right. In other words, there's not enough that say it's either too high or too low to be a majority. All of this map it falls right in the middle part of this, where most residents say the deer population is just right. But if we go down to a 25% threshold, then we see a lot more variation across the state with highs and lows. And also, when we look at how responsive it had changed over time, from 2011 on the left, 2019 on the right, we see that more and more residents are considering deer populations to be too high. What this means is from the perspective of Pennsylvania residents, and not just hunters, but residents, deer populations have been increasing over the last decade. This is also supported by increasing deer harvests during that same time period as an index of population growth. But, and this becomes one of the issues in deer management. If we contrast the survey of the state residents to a survey of deer hunters, the deer hunter surveys indicate that most hunters consistently want more deer. More than 25% of the hunters said that deer populations were too low in every single management unit, and these results are consistent across past Pennsylvania deer surveys. And in the 27 years I've been here, I haven't seen a survey yet where hunters, when asked the question, are you seeing enough deer? The answer is almost always no. And that's what they're there for. But we are also have the responsibility of managing deer for all Pennsylvania residents. So we have to consider more than just hunters. We consider other aspects. So I just went through the goals and the data that we use to determine if we're meeting our goals. The next steps to move through the deer plan decision tree to determine if the deer population objective for each WMU, whether we want to increase it, decrease it, or stabilize deer populations in each of those units. So just as an example, there's a lot of steps. If you look at these top steps up here, do people want less deer? If people do want less deer, then we look to reduce deer populations. We ask is CWD present? And if it is, then we go to our CWD response plan, and it's to reduce the deer population. But if you want to get, those are the two exceptions. We're often blamed for always wanting to reduce deer. It's not the case. If you look at our recommendations over the last decade and a half, if you want to work through all of this in order for us to make a recommendation to reduce deer populations, we have to go through all of these steps and all of these goals and these trends and these questions before we get down to this point where we will say, okay, it's time down in here where we got to reduce deer populations. So it's really hard if you're to get to the point of saying we need to reduce the deer populations if we're going to work through this entire process. So this process leads to the following deer plan objectives for each WMU. Here's a summary map where the recommended objectives for this past year. We didn't have anywhere we recommended to increase the deer population. We had these units that you see in red, 9 units. There we wanted to reduce deer populations, and the reason there was in 8 of those was because of CWD concerns. And then in 2 WMUs, 4E over here and 3D up here have high deer impacts on forest regeneration, on forest vegetation. So that is why we recommended reducing the deer population there. The next step then includes determining how many antlerless licenses are needed to achieve the objective. So the number of antlerless licenses to be harvested and the number of licenses needed to harvest 1 antlerless deer, those are factors that determine the antlerless allocation recommendation. So if we look at an example where we want to harvest 10,000 deer, we look at how many licenses it takes to harvest 1 deer, and often in many units, it's around 4 licenses to harvest 1 antlerless deer. And then we can calculate what the antlerless allocation would be for that particular unit. In this case, it would be 40,000. But season length, it does have an effect. And we adjust things based on season length. More of the tags are going to be filled if we have a longer season. So we adjust the allocation to keep the antlerless harvest on target. We look back at the example that we were using before. We harvest 10,000 deer. Now, instead of 4 licenses to harvest a deer, Now it takes only 3. And so the antlerless allocation then would be reduced from 40,000 down to 30,000. Again, keep in mind that this is to harvest the same number of deer. It's just that our licenses become more efficient when you give hunters more time. And this was one of the reasons that we wanted to go to a 2-week, go back to a 2-week concurrent season instead of the split seasons that we've been having. So all of this, I'm sorry. We post the allocations and all of the data on this document that's here on the left. We posted on the Pennsylvania Game Commission's website, where anybody can take a look at what we're using to come up with the allocations. So in this past year, they did pass concurrent seasons for a 14-day season. So we adjusted the antler allocations as best we could using the best data that we have to come up with the final allocations. Now, this is all available on the website, but this shows last year's antlerless allocations and the previous year and this year's. The units in red have a deer plan objective of reducing the deer population, and the rest are to stabilize. 13 units went from a 7-day concurrent season to a 14-day concurrent season. So you're going to see an allocation that's been adjusted to account for those added days. Typically, it leads to a reduction from the from the previous year. And reason we look back at previous years because people are always looking, but they always compare to what it was last year, but they don't always incorporate all the factors that go into the allocation. A few of the units, the recommended allocation is not a reduction from last year because the need to stabilize an increasing population. We have had CWD, forest impacts, other factors that go into effect. So we're recommending to stabilize deer populations in both WMUs. You may notice increased antlerless allocations in some of these WMUs, and in some cases there's a decrease. The increases or decreases depend on a few factors such as population trend, average antlerless harvest, the number of antlerless licenses it takes to harvest a deer. All of those things that can change on a year-by-year basis and unit by unit. So that's why we manage on a unit basis, and we look at all of our data each year. So it's important to understand that all of these units are different. We manage with similar factors, but we take measurements each year, and we adjust those allocations based on the best measurements that we have. So I would be remiss if I didn't give you just a very quick update on CWD. I'm not going to talk very much about it, but just to give you a quick update. This is a map that was developed back in April. The boundaries still, we've got the boundaries set now pretty much for our disease management areas. But they certainly could change after this year if as more and other CWD positives are found. We've expanded an importation ban. It's now illegal to import high-risk parts from anywhere outside of PA. It used to be that was only CWD positive states and provinces. So we've changed that. We put high-risk dumpsters are only available within the established area, which is this part in here, where most of our CWD positives are found. And we're going to be increasing roadkill sampling on the outside edges of the DMAs, but a lot of our sampling in here, it's kind of a moot point because we know that this is an established area. We also have a dashboard tool on our website where you can look up if your deer if you sent your deer in to be tested. You can look it up on this using this dashboard tool, and we also have a map that shows prevalence rates of different various samples that we collect. when we looked at the results for samples in the established area, it's quite concerning. We would like to keep prevalence below 5%, and it's near 10% in that established area. The rate for all samples, when you combine all of them, is just 2%. Now, just a little bit of an update. Here are 2 additional units that have had to be established within the last couple of months. DMA 5 came up here. This is in a captive facility. And so we have established a disease management area up here in Warren County. And there was another positive found over here. It's on the southwestern corner of 2H. And that's been labeled as disease management area 6. So those are 2 additions that we've had in just recently. So if we want to look at Pennsylvania as a whole, there's a couple of concerns that I have as a manager. The spread of CWD is certainly a concern. It's been growing. It's something we would love to stop. We're doing everything that we can. We're asking our hunters to cooperate and help us in this surveillance. And we're going to do everything that we can to slow that spread. Another concern is that just in general, our buck harvests have been coming up. My concern is an increasing population. And certainly there's lots of other concerns regarding forestry, agriculture, other aspects of deer. So that is a concern, whether we can hold those populations over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That's what my concern is. If we and part of that concern comes with another issue, and that is with hunter populations. Our populations of hunters, just in general in Pennsylvania, in other states, we're getting older. As the baby boomers, I'm at the end of the baby boomers. If you look at where we are, there's a wave of baby boomers coming through, but in the next 15 years, a lot of those baby boomers are going to age out, and they're gonna quit hunting around that age 70 mark. So when that happens, my concern is, are we going to have the hunters that we need in order to control deer populations in Pennsylvania? So you can look at CWD affecting it, hunter numbers affecting, whether we can control things. There's a lot of things that future deer managers are going to be facing here in Pennsylvania. So with that, I'm going to end, and I'm not going to ask for questions now, but I will turn this over to our moderator and turn you over to Brian.
All right, thanks so much, Bret. Appreciate it. Yeah, if you have any questions for Bret, please do keep sticking those in the chat here. I've got my eye on it, so I know what question is for who. But excellent, Brian. I can see that, so we're ready to go when you are. Appreciate it.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I'm Brian Eyler. I'm the Game Mammal Section Leader. I got to think about that for Maryland Department of Natural Resources. I was a deer project leader for about 14 years, and I've been with the department for about 20 years. I'm a Pennsylvania guy. I got my undergrad from Penn State in wildlife, and I got a master's from Maryland, and I've been with the department ever since for about 20 years. So I'm going to apologize because a lot of my presentation is going to sound just like Bret's. Just you could take Pennsylvania and replace it with Maryland, but yeah, we were talking before we started that we all struggle with the same issues with deer, regardless of the state or the province or the size of it. A lot of the issues are the same. But just real quick, I just wanted to give a little bit of background history for some of you that might not know it, but it wasn't always this way with deer. If you go back to pre-colonial and colonial times, we had an abundant deer population in the East, but probably not as many deer as we have now. They were important to the Native American tribes in the East, and in Maryland, they were legislatively protected as early as 1729. There were actually laws in the book regulating harvest. Shift into the 1800s, and most wildlife and the environment took a beating, including deer. We had the Industrial Revolution, market hunting, habitat alteration and destruction, and those regulations and went to the wayside, and deer were just about extinct in Maryland and in much of the East. In Maryland, we only had them left in Garrett County, the far western county in the state. 1900s, we had our first green movement. People started to recognize the importance of protecting the environment and protecting wildlife. This was a period of protecting and restocking. There was either no deer hunting, or if there was deer hunting, it was buck only. That sentiment has kind of carried over. We struggle now to get hunters to shoot enough antlerless or female deer for us. This buck hunting only lore has kind of stuck from the beginning, although our hunters have gotten a lot more progressive, fortunately. We had a hunting license requirement starting in 1918, and like most states in the East, deer were restocked from varied sources from all over the country. I think we had brought deer in from Michigan and a lot of other states. So that was pretty common during this time as well. Even into the 1960s, that was occurring. No idea that we would create the monster that we fight now. 1920s to the 70s kind of overlaps. That's generally, you can think of that as a period of population regrowth, but for the most part, deer weren't causing major issues during this time. In Maryland, we had some of our WMAs were actually deer refuges. It's where deer were propagated, and released to restock areas. You also had a lot of improvements in habitat, forest regrowth, tree plantings, and then urban suburban development, which actually indirectly helped the deer population a lot. When to the 1980s, that's when we really started to see our first problems with deer. That's when we started seeing exponential growth in Maryland. And if you can see my cursor, here's one of the, a good reason why. We had a lot of these suburban areas cropping up. You have prime deer habitat out here, and a lot of times this ended up taking hunting out of the equation. So, there was no more deer hunting in this area, and you still had all this great food, and and deer just, that was perfect for deer, obviously. So so you take favorable habitat, few natural predators. We have bear, we have bear and coyote and bobcats, basically, that will take fawns, but nothing other than man is really a natural efficient predator on adult deer. So we have a few natural predators. We have a mild climate. We really don't have winter kill. As you go north into the New England, further north into New England states and provinces, winter actually regulates their deer population. They struggle with winter kill. Down here, we don't have that, obviously. We do have a few deer yards left in the western part of Maryland, out in Garrett and Allegheny County. And in a real hard winter, they will be used occasionally, but we very rarely see any kind of a die-off. If we do, it's typically young deer and sick deer. So you put all that together, and it just ends up being a very healthy deer population for Maryland and for much of the East. We have a sex age kill model, Downing reconstruction model that we use, and most of the states honestly do use the same model. It relies on harvest data, so it's a good model for us to use. We peaked back about 20 years ago at right around 300,000 deer in the state. We got very aggressive with seasons and bag limits. We dropped the population down some, but we've struggled to drop it further. We've been stable for the last 15 plus years, bouncing around 200 to 250,000 deer. And they're very resilient. We have a lot of good deer in the state. You don't think of urban, suburban Maryland, little state, as being, a deer state, but actually our coastal plain soils around the Chesapeake Bay are some of the best soils in the country for growing big deer. We have world-class deer. Actually, we had a buck that was top 25 in the world for a period. So we can grow some really nice deer, and deer hunting in Maryland is very popular, even though we only have, 60,000 or so deer hunters compared to Pennsylvania, which was at one point probably 1 million. I don't think it's that now, but so that's where deer are good. You know, if you look at the money that comes from deer hunters, even in little old Maryland, you know, it's estimated that hunters spend 266 million annually, and most of that is deer hunting. Probably 220 plus million of that is spent by deer hunters. And then when you look at that effect on the economy after you throw in taxes and salaries and wages, you know, it's a $400 million economy annually just in Maryland. And that's important from our standpoint. You know, I work for the Wildlife and Heritage Service within Department of Natural Resources because, you know, if you look at our budget, we are almost solely special funded. We get no general tax dollars. So 63% of our budget comes from hunting license sales. Most of those licenses are sold for deer hunting. And then 30+% is a federal aid match, Pittman-Robertson excise tax dollars. So 95% of our budget, just say 95%, it's probably even a little higher than that now, is, you know, comes from hunters, you know, and most of those are deer hunters. And then of course that money doesn't just go back into deer management. That money is used to purchase more land. That money is used to, you know, help manage non-game species, other game species, et cetera. So from that standpoint, deer do a lot of good. You know, there's power in that money, and without that money, we would be in a world of hurt. But as Bret alluded to, you know, there's a lot of problems with deer, and you all out there know that there's a lot of problems with deer as well, whether, you know, it's roadkill, crop damage, urban suburban issues, or, you know, or forest regeneration issues. Deer cause a lot of issues. Bret showed a survey from responsive management. We use responsive management as well for most of our work. We revised our deer plan a couple years ago. We did a survey, we collected public comments. We had about 800 public comments collected. And of those 800, 23% were about urban suburban deer issues and 16% were about crop damage issues. Out of all the comments, you know, so that's a pretty big chunk. You know, people weren't commenting on how good deer were. A lot of the comments were fix our deer problem, you know, which happens in a lot of states, Pennsylvania included. Crop damage is huge, especially in Maryland. You know, over the last 5 to 10 years, we've really been dealing with crop damage issues with deer. These dollar figures here are really outdated. This was about 10, 12 years ago. It was estimated at $7.5 million annually in Maryland just for deer, and that's way underestimated. It is significantly more than that, the deer damage to crops. Some of that survey work from responsive management. We asked, have you in the past year experienced damage to your agricultural crops from deer? And you can see 3/4 of the farmers responded yes, up from 63%, 10 or 11 years prior to that when we did the same survey. So a lot of farmers, in Maryland experienced some level of crop damage from deer. Deer vehicle collisions, State Farm does a good job. They actually project for the whole insurance industry for all states how many deer vehicle collisions there are. Excuse me. In Maryland, they estimate about 30,000 collisions annually, just Maryland. And if you do the math, that's over $100 million in damage annually, just from deer vehicle collisions. So big dollars. Going back to that survey again, you can see that, we asked, for those in the survey that said, yeah, we want to see the deer population decrease, the number one reason why was to reduce deer vehicle collisions. One more question related to that. We asked, what's your feelings about deer? And you can see it's equally split. I enjoy seeing and having deer around, about 40%, roughly the same number said I enjoy seeing a few deer, but I worry about the problems they cause. Not a big change over 10 to 11 years. The attitude of Marylanders towards deer for the last 10 to 20 years haven't really changed appreciably. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of people who just plain look at them as vermin and would like to see deer disappear off the landscape. That's a small number, thankfully. So, but definitely a big chunk that are concerned with the damage that deer can cause. So that's what makes managing deer so challenging for all of us. we can't just manage for one user group anymore. 50 years ago, it would have been a lot easier. We were just trying to restore a native population and provide a recreational opportunity for hunters. But now, whether it's a soccer mom worried about Lyme's disease, or a farmer and crop damage, or a forester and regeneration, or a fellow wildlife biologist worried about habitat damage for songbirds or warblers, or animal rights people who are concerned about deer welfare. Everybody has a vested interest in deer, and they all have a right to say what their interest is, and have their interest addressed. But it makes it challenging to find a middle ground for managing this species. So again, most people don't see deer as a vermin, though, which is a good thing. 88% agreed or strongly agree that deer are an important balance of nature. So, in this responsive management survey from 2018. So most people recognize the value of deer, fortunately. We do have a deer management plan. Our first one was in 1998. We revised it in 2009, and then revised it again in 2020. It kind of outlines and charts the course for how we do approach deer management. In Maryland, and probably in, like Bret said, in most other states, we manage deer for a balance between cultural and biological carrying capacity. So cultural carrying capacity is the density that deer can be at, that humans can withstand, versus biological, which is the density that the habitat can support. And in most cases, the cultural carrying capacity is much, much lower than the biological carrying capacity. Deer reach a density that people can't tolerate, and that density could increase significantly, and still survive. The habitat would not look good, but they can still survive at those higher densities. The plan also outlines our primary management options. Hunter harvest is our #1 tool for managing deer, just like every other state in the country. We don't have any other tool as effective. In Maryland, we also have deer management permits, or crop damage permits. We also have deer cooperator permits, which are sharpshooting permits, basically. And then on the non-lethal side, fencing, repellents, deer-resistant plants. And then down there by itself, deer contraceptives and sterilization, which really isn't, that's not ready for prime time at this point. It's still more in the research phase. Just talk a little bit about those, though. Like I said, deer harvest is our #1 tool. This is the harvest in Maryland since we started hunting again back in 1927. The maroon is the antlered harvest. The yellow is the antlerless. 1927, we killed 5 bucks in Garrett County. And you can see where we've come since 1927. We had this exponential growth during the 80s and 90s. We really ramped up the harvest and dropped that population down, which is reflected in the buck harvest. And you can see how we went from, harvesting very few antlerless deer, or which are, a big part female, to what component the female population now makes up compared to the male or the antlered component. Most counties, we shoot about 66% female or antlerless deer compared to about 33% male deer, which is just enough basically to keep the population stable in all honesty. So, hunting is our #1 tool, and fortunately, the public recognizes the value in that. I don't know if you can see, I got the Zoom controls over top of this. Do you guys have the Zoom controls over top of that as well, or can you see that whole?
It's clear for us.
It's clear for you. Okay, the Zoom controls are over top of it for me. I'm sorry. So, anyways, so luckily, people recognize the value in hunting and deer hunting. In Maryland, like 3% of the population hunts. That's it. But that doesn't mean the other 97% are anti-hunting. Just not, that's not the case at all. The majority, strongly agree or moderately agree, 77% in this case, that that we need deer hunting to maintain a healthy deer population. So, and then this is just another example of that. 67% are strongly in favor or somewhat in favor of that. So we're fortunate that we do have public support for deer hunting. Sometimes the noise would suggest otherwise, but fortunately, we do have strong support for hunting, even in a state like Maryland that's as urbanized as what it is. So yeah, so we're basically throwing the kitchen sink at them, in case you're wondering what this little picture down here is. We are very, very liberal in Maryland. Our deer season starts in early September with archery and runs through early February. Region B is most of the state, basically from Washington County, which is the skinny part of Maryland. East is what is Region B. The two counties and part of Washington County are in Region A in the west. But you can see we have a 45 plus deer bag limit in Region B. And even in Region A, where we're conservative, we have a 5 deer bag limit in Region A. And this doesn't include any of the crop damage permits. We have a suburban deer management zone, which is from basically the 5 counties between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. We have an unlimited antlerless bag limit in those counties. Hunters can harvest as many antlerless deer as they want. We don't have antlerless tags, so they don't have to buy extra tags. All these deer come with their license. Everything we do, seasons, bag limits, it all revolves around trying to harvest more antlerless deer or more female deer. We allow modern muzzle loaders, crossbows. We have about half of our counties in Maryland were shotgun only. You couldn't use centerfire rifles. We've changed that last year to now those counties can also use straight-walled cartridge rifles, which are kind of a shotgun on slugs or on steroids, I guess you could kind of say. They're very ballistically, they're more similar to a shotgun than a bottleneck cartridge rifle, but definitely provide more advantage than a shotgun. So we're doing everything we can to try to encourage the harvest of antlerless deer. Sunday hunting in Maryland is legislatively controlled. The Department of Natural Resources doesn't have the authority to determine which Sundays are open. That has to go through the legislature, but we support that as much as we can. So, since 2004, we've slowly been adding Sundays to allow hunters, the full weekend to try to help harvest deer. And then we've also seen some reductions in archery safety zones. In Maryland, the standard is 150 yards. And again, this is legislative, but we have seen in numerous counties that have reduced that archery zone to either 50 yards or 100 yards in an effort to try to get hunters into more areas to help harvest deer, particularly in those urban, suburban areas. So that's hunter harvest. Deer management permits, crop damage permits, also an important part of our deer management program. We harvest around 10,000 deer a year now on crop damage permits. These permits can be used 365 days a year, don't cost the farmer anything to get them, and we're very liberal with giving them out. If you're wondering what this big drop here is this is when we got liberal with our regular hunting seasons and bag limits. So a lot of those farmers that were operating off crop damage permits were able to just shift over to the regular hunter harvest, and that's why this dropped down, but it's now creeping back up again. Like I said, we harvest around 10,000 deer a year. We also have a lot of managed hunts in the state. So those are like state parks and other public properties mainly. They're tightly controlled. Hunters are vetted. They have assigned stand locations. Their bag limits are exempt from the state bag limit from their normal bag limit. And oftentimes their firearm seasons are much longer than the normal state season. So just an effort, to try to maintain or manage deer numbers in these more densely urban areas where deer numbers are more problematic. Sharpshooting kind of goes along with the managed hunts. These are licensed for hire type deals. A lot of these take place on government installations more than anywhere else. We have had a couple private neighborhoods that have hired sharpshooters, but it's not real common. It's mostly government facilities, and it's small scale. We have about 2,000 deer a year that are harvested under these sharpshooting programs. As far as non-lethal options go, there's fencing. The thing with fencing is it doesn't solve the deer problem. It just moves the deer problem somewhere else and might make a worse deer problem somewhere else. You also have expense and management issues with fencing, can be unsightly, but it can work obviously in certain situations. And some of our farmers have found fencing to be effective. But obviously when you get into larger scale farms with thousands of acres, not a practical solution. Deer resistant plantings and repellents. Our extension service has worked on some of this, and there's some good web resources available for this. Generally what we tell the public is that deer are very adaptable. And what they don't eat now doesn't mean they won't eat next month or next year. So, it's kind of, again, you have to keep after it to try to figure something out and stay one step ahead of the deer. And then along with those are repellents. A lot of the repellents are gimmicks, but we do recommend from time to time, and some of our field staff will actually loan out some of these kind of things for homeowners to try. Dogs can be very effective. We have a couple of large scale nurseries in Maryland that actually do use dogs to deter deer. But again, you have dogs in that you have to maintain. So that has its own set of logistics with it as well. Contraceptive and sterilization, still largely in the research phase. What we found, we've been involved with contraception and sterilization for a long time, since the 90s, actually. There's been projects done in Maryland. Gonacon, which is the one approved, some of the pivotal trials were actually done in Maryland. So we've cooperated on these projects over time, and we've learned quite a bit. But best chance of success is in fenced or insular populations. You have to have easy access to the deer, and the deer have to be acclimated to people, because you have to be able to dart these deer and capture the or drop net these deer and catch them. And then unfortunately, you got to go back and give them a booster as well right now. But there's two, Gonacon and Zonistat D, are approved by EPA as a registered pesticide for deer use. Gonacon does require, you have to tag each deer, because these drugs are not FDA approved. And Zonistat D, we would require the same thing. If it ever came to where Maryland would approve Zonistat D, we would also require to capture and tagging of deer, which logistically makes it very difficult to work with these drugs. Interestingly enough, Zonistat D, which is the most recent one, the label requirement precludes it from being used on food or feed, which deer are food. So kind of, again, it logistically makes it a little challenging. So the barriers, it's expensive, need for capture and tagging of all deer, and need for that follow-up booster makes it challenging. They're going to keep working on this, and hopefully we see some progress. But right now, from a state management perspective, it's not where we need it to be. Generally, from the Maryland studies, these drugs were good at reducing fawning. They do recruit. There's no doubt that they can stop does from reproducing, but they've never been able to demonstrate an appreciable decline in the deer population to a level that would deem it to be a success from our standpoint. One of the study areas in Maryland started in the 90s with right around 200 deer per square mile. And 5 years ago, it was still at 150 deer per square mile, roughly. And that's a 1 square mile fenced area. So again, there's some work to be done here. Not saying that we won't ever see anything that would work, but we need more work. So deer management challenges, Bret alluded to some of this. Decline in hunters and bag limit saturation, that's a big one for us. Bret mentioned the decline in hunters. Here's what Maryland looks like. And there's other states that look this way too, but it's not a pretty picture. License sales, we peaked back in the 1970s. We've been in decline ever since. The charcoal color is our regular resident hunter. The gray here is the junior hunters. The senior hunters are the whitish, and then the light gray are our non-residents. And you can see how the proportion of junior hunters, or the number of junior hunters, have declined over time, how the senior percentage, those baby boomers, as Bret said, have increased over time. And unfortunately, we have a healthy non-resident population that does help us. But when we rely on hunting for our budget, and when we rely on hunting to manage deer, this is not a good chart or a good graph, obviously. And we're not sure how to fix this. We have a great information and education group and outreach group that are R3, recruitment, retention, and reactivation, that work hard on this. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do on trying how to fix this. Another big problem is access to land, to hunt and control deer. There's so much land out there that's either not hunted or it's under hunted. and that they just serve as refuges, and they just serve as a source, of deer for the landscape. And these kind of go hand in hand because, it's hard to recruit hunters if they don't have any place to hunt. And that's what we find anymore. Unfortunately, deer hunting is turning into a rich man sport. If you look at the price of leases, it's crazy how much people are willing to pay to hunt deer. And it's forcing a lot of hunters out of the field, unfortunately. So those two kind of go hand in hand. Effective urban and suburban deer management. We have struggled with this for 30 plus years on how you manage deer in these urban suburban areas. Some of you might know this corridor, the 270 corridor coming down from Frederick into DC. You think about that area as being very populated, but look at the green on this aerial photo. This is all prime deer habitat, and how do you manage deer in these areas? It's extremely challenging. We have a urban suburban deer biologist, George Timko. He specializes in this, and he pulls his hair out daily on trying to figure out how to manage deer and help these suburban and urban residents solve their issue, their deer problem. Another challenge is the non-lethal technologies. Like I said, it's just not there right now. And we could definitely use something in some of these areas where it's just not conducive to lethal control. Probably one of the biggest issues is there's not a lot of money to be made in this arena, unless you're Tony D. Nicola and working on Manhattan, I guess. But otherwise, there's not a lot of money to be made with these non-lethal technologies. And so I don't think you see a lot of private investment from private companies. The Gonacon is the one approved, and it was funded by USDA, as a government created drug. So we definitely could use some more work in this arena, give us something that's viable. Huge challenge. Bret alluded to this: consensus on deer population levels and management strategies. Farmers have an idea, have one wish for where deer density should be. Hunters have another. The general public have another. And then they all have a different idea on what management strategy we use. Do we use hunting? Do we use non-lethal? So it is a huge challenge, as I mentioned earlier, to try to get everybody on the same page and try to find some middle ground on how to approach deer management. Politics, I don't have to say anymore, but obviously politics come into play with deer management, just like they come into play with many other things. Crop damage issues, I talked a little bit about that. That is a huge challenge for us, how to figure out how to solve some of these deer issues for farmers and give them a tool that is effective at helping reduce these damages. And then, as Bret mentioned, chronic wasting disease. We have chronic wasting disease as well. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about CWD. I apologize if this is redundant for some of you. This won't take me long, but I'll just quickly, because I don't think Bret covered some of this, but just the basics. CWD was first diagnosed in Colorado in 1967. Species include white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, and moose. It is an abnormal or mutated prion. So it's not a bacteria, it's not a virus. You can't kill it. You have to denature it to get rid of it. It's basically a small protein. It comes into contact with your normal proteins in the brain, causes those proteins to misfold, and literally causes holes in the brain and causes death. There's no cure at this time for it. Related diseases are mad cow, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, Kuru. This is why it's a concern, is because it is in the same family as mad cow and Creutzfeldt-Jakob. Both of those are human. Humans are susceptible. At this point, there's been no evidence that humans are susceptible to chronic wasting disease, but we have to be concerned. We can't treat it like some of the other more common deer diseases or deer illnesses, that like hemorrhagic disease, for instance, where we know there's definitely not a human issue. Transmission, CWD in the environment, animal to animal, contaminated feed, contaminated soil, possibly others. We don't know. There's a lot we're still learning about CWD. Control in the wild, herd reductions to reduce deer density is probably the best approach, although it's very, very challenging. And there's very few success stories out there currently trying to control this disease in the wild. Controlling captives, and it is in captives. CWD, unfortunately, probably one of the ways it moves around the country is through captive buying and selling of deer and moving live deer. But in captives, generally, you would be talking depopulation to try to control it in captive herds. North American map, it's not pretty, and this is probably a little out of date by this point. Definitely is out of date at this point, but you can see the current distribution across North America. It's in the United States and in Canada as well. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, as Bret mentioned, this map is out of date as well, but West Virginia found it in 2005 in Slanesville, right around this area. We found it 5 years later. And then Pennsylvania, I can't remember, Bret could probably jump in, but Pennsylvania either found it at the same time or right around this, maybe a year later, I can't remember. And then Virginia is also in the mix there as well. So, and unfortunately, we're just seeing, a spread of this disease over time. We currently sample, we monitor for CWD in Garrett, Allegheny, Washington, Frederick, and Montgomery County. This is our CWD sampling area. Our management area, where we have carcass transport restrictions, et cetera, is Allegheny and Washington County. These are the two counties where we have positives at currently. We have about 80 over the last, since 2010 when we discovered it, we are up to about 80 positive deer in these two counties. At some point we're going to find it in the adjacent counties. It's just a matter of time. So concerns, there's deer population concerns. If you look in the West, CWD, where they've had it longer, it has definitely negatively impacted deer populations in the West. We're uncertain what those impacts will be in the East. We have higher deer numbers, we have more productive deer habitat and more productive deer. So I think the jury is still out on what CWD means as far as the deer population goes. A lot of our deer out here will probably reproduce once or twice before they would succumb to the disease. So we'll see, but it's very possible that we could see, we could have deer population consequences here in the East, like in the West. Human health concerns, again, the jury, it doesn't look like there's any evidence at this time that humans can contract CWD from eating venison. But there's conflicting results on primates. One Canadian study with primates, it suggested that primates did contract CWD from eating contaminated venison, but then another study using the same species of primate found no, that it wasn't possible. So there's some conflicting studies out there. There's more studies going on. So the more we learn, the better off we'll be as time goes by. There's issues with the tests. It's not a food safety test. So, when we send a sample off to get it tested, it either comes back as positive or not detected. And not detected means just that. It doesn't necessarily mean it's negative. It just means that the prions weren't at a level that was detectable in the venison or in the deer, in the brain or lymph nodes. So, we got to stress to hunters that this is not a food safety test, and there's limited testing facilities. We don't have any place in Maryland that can do these kind of tests. So all of our samples get shipped actually to Pennsylvania to the Ag Diagnostic Lab. They do our testing for us. And sometimes it can be 3, 4, 5 months till we get our test results back, depending on how many samples there's testing for other states. So that's a concern as well, because we want to keep our hunters educated as to what's going on, especially if if we have one of their samples and it comes back positive, we will notify them, and we need to do that in a timely manner. Agency concerns, loss of funding, via declining hunting license sales. Hunters that are concerned about CWD might decide it's not worth deer hunting anymore. They might stop buying the license. Again, 95% of our budget comes from those license sales. So that's a concern. And then, as Bret said, also, it's a loss of an effective tool for managing deer. We manage deer through hunting. If we lose hunters because of chronic wasting disease, not wanting to hunt anymore, or moving somewhere else to hunt, going somewhere else to hunt, we're going to see problems with increasing deer numbers more so than what we currently do. So that was the wham bam quick CWD update, and that's all I have. So I will turn it back over to the moderator, and thank you very much. And there's my contact information if anybody would like it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Sure.
What a crazy thing how, I don't know, it's, yeah, with both of y'all, there's a parallel there that, this is a resource we care about, but there's just too many. Yeah, it's just kind of peculiar. It's an interesting situation that deer find themselves in. So we have a lot of questions to move through, which is fantastic. A lot of like really good ones too. Okay, so we're going to start here from Mark Anderson, and I believe this was to Bret initially. And it was about the forest regeneration data from the Forest Service. And I was kind of a little skeptical too. It's not a lot of woods I've been in that it seems like there's a lower deer impact. But so Mark's question here is, are your metrics on forest regenerative and deer impacts similar to those used by neighboring states? And yeah, basically, if there's could be a little bit more information, if you have it, on the metrics that were used, or any of that. I'm kind of curious too, to kind of put a little bit extra on top of Mark's question there, if this was, public land, private land, etc. But so yeah, Bret, do you have any more information about that study?
Yeah, yes. The metrics that we use they come from the U.S. Forest Service, and that the forest inventory and analysis data, they are done across the other surrounding states. So they're collected by the same group, because they do it on a federal level, and then I believe we go through a purchasing process to buy their data. The plots that I showed you, they are on public and private land. So they some people have told me there's these plots are permanent plots, so they have permanent markers at them. So they come back, year after, visited on a regular basis. I'm not sure. I think it's been changing because of the funding, but so they periodically come back to these plots, and they've been doing it for a number for decades, to look at changes in forest composition. So that's that part of it. So as far as the surrounding states, I don't know if other states are getting this deer impact data from us, but as I understand, they do collect it. Brian, do you have any more on?
No, I don't. Our amount of our like forest areas are really relegated to Garrett and Allegheny County. So it would be such a small, and I mean, I think those plots exist in Maryland, but I think it would be so limited for us in scope that we've never really pursued it that close. We just wouldn't have that many plots to be able to, have any statistical confidence, I don't think.
That's interesting. Thanks, guys. Well, it's good to know that it is good. Good data. Okay, so next question, and actually, especially since both of y'all talked about CWD, maybe we'll start with Bret on this question, and then kick it up to Brian here again. So from Craig, what kind of outreach is being done to educate hunters and the general public about the spread of CWD? And has it been effective in communicating your management decisions? So we'll start with you, Bret.
I'm probably not the right person to ask because it's not in my bureau, but we do have we're doing considerably more than we had been. We're trying to ramp this up. We have some things that are under review that are ready to come out. We do have a fair amount of information on our website, but there is a what they call a storybook that's going to be coming out. I don't know when. I know it's under review. I've seen it. It's very good. But I would look on our website. There is quite a bit of information on the Game Commission's website on CWD. But as far as being able to get that to people, I'm not sure how, exactly how we do that. I mean, it's there for them to come to, but it takes the effort to get there and do the reading. So I don't know how much of that information is really getting out to our general public and to our hunting public.
All right, gotcha. Brian, how about down in Maryland?
Yeah, so it's on our website. Obviously, we do a press release for sampling results every year, and newspaper articles, radio interviews when they come up, but just typically the standard education and outreach. And it is challenging. As Bret said, we can put it out there, but we can't make people come to it and read it. So it can be challenging to get the message out. And I think what we've seen, a lot of the states have seen is that, when you first find the disease, there's a lot of interest from hunters. But that interest kind of wanes over time. They still keep seeing plenty of deer. Nobody's dying from the disease. So it's hard to keep them keeping it serious or recognizing it as being a serious issue. No matter what we put out there, that's a challenge. So
Brian, I want to add to that, from what we've seen when we were in Bedford and Blair counties, where our established area is, the longer that's where it began here in Pennsylvania in 2012. And if you talk to those people or survey those people, they're not concerned about CWD.
Right.
They're living with it.
That's the same way in Maryland. It's the same situation. So
yeah, so it becomes part of their life, and they're shooting deer and they're eating deer there. Yeah. And the longer it goes, the more complacent they get. When you go to a new area, like we did here in northwestern PA, those people up there are extremely concerned. And they'll show up for meetings, but where it's established, they get more and more complacent as time goes on.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So I did rifle through my desk, and I found the 2020 Hunter Trapper Digest for PA. There's 4 pages in it, and it's only maybe, you can look, 65 total pages here, 4 pages dedicated to CWD. So there's a bit of an answer there too. But yeah, you can lead a water to horse, or you can lead a horse to water. Geez, there we go. Okay, maybe it's a little later. My brain feels like it's later than it is. Okay, so another really excellent question, kind of across both lines here. Maybe we'll flip it. This time we'll start with Brian. So well, it was initially to Bret, but so Bret, I've really admired the efforts by PA/DCNR to engage women in the outdoors. I'm thinking the Women in the Outdoor program led by PA Parks, as well as programs to introduce women to fly fishing. Is there any similar programs for women led by the state to introduce them to hunting? So yeah, initially asked to Bret, but let's start with Brian there over in Maryland. Are there efforts to introduce women to hunting, especially with these declining hunter population issues?
Yeah, we have a great staff dedicated to those kind of programs. And in Maryland, we have Bo becoming an outdoors woman, and they go through various hunting scenarios: deer, pheasants. I'm trying to think. I think even waterfowl. So we do have programs in Maryland, that are looking towards minorities, women. These programs started out really focusing on kids, but I think over time we've figured out that you got to have the parent if you're going to recruit the kid. And most of the kids that we were attracting to these programs were already hunters or already fishermen. So we've kind of shifted. We still do kid programs, but we've kind of shifted to adults, like you said, whether they're women or other minorities. And they're great programs. I guess the one thing I will say is that these programs in Maryland, might recruit 50 or I don't know, 550, I don't know what the number may be a year. But with that chart I showed you of what's happening in Maryland, we need 5,000 a year. So they're great programs. We need those programs, but we need more than that to fix this issue. So.
And we have programs in Pennsylvania, although I have to admit that I'm not real familiar with those the programs that we have. the 3 R's we work with. As far as women specifically, I know we have had the bow program, Becoming an Outdoors Woman. I don't know how active that is right now, but I think we do have those programs in place. I'm just not as familiar with them as Brian is with Maryland. So I apologize for that.
No worries, no worries. Okay, excellent. So this question, I believe, was in reference to when Brian was looking at some of the, funding, from the license sales and then, Pittman Robertson dollars. So looking at PA, Brett, do you have any numbers on, how much revenue is generated by those sales and by PR dollars, period, or any other kind of federal assistance for wildlife management?
I know that that's all on our website in a budget, a pie graph. Pennsylvania, for PR monies, we get, I don't know what the dollar figures are, but we are, I think, second, maybe third in line. I think Texas is in front of us because of the sheer number of people that are there. But we get a good proportion of the shares from the PR monies, but I don't have the exact dollars in place. If I knew all those dollars, I would be at a much higher level than I am right now, and that I don't have those. Our executive director could probably tell you, because he's much more worried about those kind of things.
That's good to know. Yeah, we can look it up, but I had no idea that we were. Did you say number 2 or number 3? Either way.
I think we had been. I know I've seen it as number 2, and we're either number 2 or number 3. Just because, and there's a fairly lengthy formula for coming up with that number. How much money goes to each state. But I know that the hunter numbers is one of the factors, and that's one that really helps Pennsylvania.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad I get my license every year, even though I don't always get to go out. So I'm still helping. Excellent. Okay, so we got a question for Brian, pertinent to the kind of suburban urban areas. What advice or solutions do you offer to folks who are frustrated there by higher deer populations?
So yeah, so kind of what I covered, depending on the location, we will encourage some kind of lethal control if at all possible. And if not, we'll offer up some of those non-lethal options. But first and foremost, what we counsel them on is often they're in a area that has a homeowners association or something like, governance. And they have to first get over that hurdle of getting buy-in from their other neighbors to do management. And that tends to be where a lot of the progress falls apart before it ever begins. It is very challenging for these homeowners that want to control deer to be able to control deer. And it's not because of the state or the county governance, it's because of a homeowners association or something like that, where they just can't come to consensus and the wheels grind and nothing ever happens. We've been back to some of these areas in Maryland 3, 4, 5 times over, a decade, counseling them on the same topics and doing the same thing, and they can never get beyond getting consensus within their own group. So that's the first thing that a lot of these folks need to do. But if they're in areas where they don't have to deal with that, then we will recommend bow hunting or some kind of bow hunting group. They're pretty popular in this area. Virginia uses a lot of organized bow hunter groups as well. Lethal control is what we really need in some form or fashion. And some of these professional sharpshooters, there's not a lot of them, but some of them do operate in some of these urban suburban areas as well. So that is an option, but that is a pay for a for hire deal. So, again, it's hard sometimes to get homeowners that want to fork out the money to pay for that. And it's expensive. I mean, I don't blame them. So.
All right, well, perfect kind of follow up to that question. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in the chat, but so in a hypothetical world where, we lose, the hunter numbers to the point where they're not really appreciably, contributing, what would be the next best option for a control measure? And that, I guess, would be for both of y'all. Yeah, that's a dim future.
If I can start if you want, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Whitetail deer are one animal that there's going to need to be some form of lethal control. Otherwise, there's going to be conflicts. The question becomes, though, is how, at what point is that conflict too much for people to handle? And if we get to the point where hunters cannot handle deer population for one reason or another, I think I think there will have to be some other form of harvesting deer, of removing deer, whether that's by a professional company, hired individuals. I think there's, if hunters can't do it, then somebody else is going to need to step in and do it. The real question, though, becomes is how do you pay for it? Where do you come up with that kind of money across the broad landscape? Where deer continue to reproduce year after year after year. It's not being stopped. I can see some other forms of lethal management, coming into play, ones that may not be acceptable right now. But when we get to a level where deer numbers are beyond where they're going to be tolerated, then those other unacceptable forms right now become more acceptable.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we don't have an answer, to be honest. What we are going to do when we get to that point, we'll see. As Brett said, though, it's probably going to have to be some kind of lethal control of some sort. But we have 60,000 hunters in Maryland, or deer hunters in Maryland, and they're removing 80,000 deer a year, and we're barely keeping the population stable. How do you hire 80,000 people to remove, or 60,000 people to remove 80,000 deer for you? Or even how do you hire 6,000 people to remove 80,000 deer for you? It's just, we don't know. We don't have an answer to that right now. So that's a good question.
And to think of kind of things sort of be moving, over time, and how much human deer conflict would we need to, reintroduce the wolf and the cougar?
Right. And we get that suggestion from time to time, mountain lions and wolves, bring back Nittany lions, and and they don't mix real well with with however many million people we have in Maryland, so but we do get that suggestion from time to time as well. So
we get enough conflict with coyotes and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, so you kind of touched on this, Brian, about Sunday hunting as a way to kind of open things up a little bit more. And I'll just read the question verbatim because county government stuff here doesn't compete with PA brain. But so has a DNR considered state mandated open Sunday hunt rather than local county decision?
So basically it's controlled by the legislature. So in a way it is state controlled. Obviously it's county delegations that bring those bills forward. But we don't have the authority to do that. It takes an actual law to be able to do that. And DNR is not in a position where they would sponsor a law to do that, and it wouldn't pass anyways. there's a lot of support for Sunday hunting, but there's also, there's also some significant opposition to Sunday hunting, which is why we don't have it uniformly across the state. We have Sunday hunting in 20 of 23 counties. So we have 3 counties that don't have any Sunday hunting, and then the other 20 counties have some number of Sundays. We have about a half a dozen counties that have just about every Sunday in deer season now, and then the rest have less than that. But long story short, there's political opposition, towards Sunday hunting in some of these counties, and it's tough opposition. So it's not something where we can just decide we're going to change this and put a law out. It just doesn't work that way. So we support any Sunday bill that comes out. We would love to see us uniform Sunday model, whether it's all Sundays or, or just a certain number of Sundays, but at least if every county had it, it would be an improvement. But, we take a little bit at a time. So hopefully at some point we'll get there.
Interesting. Now, Bret, for you, so I believe we have 3 Sunday hunts or something. Do you have a handle on if that has increased harvest numbers? I know it's pretty new.
What we've seen for the most part, it tends to shift the harvest. It may have. It's going to take another. It's going to take a few more years, but our harvest, the highest harvest days when we opened up on a Monday was Monday and Tuesday, and followed by the 2 Saturdays in our gun season. But now that we have gone to a Saturday after Thanksgiving opener, and then the second year of that, last year they added Sunday. The Saturday and Sundays became your heavy harvest days. Monday has just become another day of the week. Where you get a trickle of the harvest coming in through Monday through Friday, and then Saturday. Last year, we had 13 of the units were in a split season format. So that was a heavy harvest day in some of those units, in those 13, and followed then on that Saturday, on that first, well, it'll be the second Saturday, and then followed by the closing Saturday. So. But in a nutshell, what we've seen so far is it's kind of a shift of the harvest. It's in order to say that we're seeing more harvest or what the effect is, we're going to need a few more years of data. But but things continue to change. It's hard as a scientist to keep track of things when the several knobs are being turned at the same time. And people ask us, well, what effect did this have? Well, we don't know, because there were 4 different knobs turned. And so this year we've gone to a statewide concurrent season. We are anticipating that Saturday and Sunday of the first opening weekend, those are going to be your heaviest harvest days, probably followed by the following Saturday and then the Saturday after that. So that's kind of where we're looking at with the gun season. As far as the other Sundays in Pennsylvania, we were given by the legislature 3 Sundays. One of them had to be in rifle season, one of them had to be in archery season, and the other one we got to choose. And the choice was to do it for the bear season. So you have a Saturday and Sunday in bear season, followed by the Monday and Tuesday. Then you have the Thanksgiving break, and then Saturday and Sunday again for the deer season. And then there was one Sunday in the archery season, and that is the last Sunday, so that the hunters were able to hunt as much as they could during the breeding season, during the rut. Again, and also, like Brian said, we're going to take whatever Sunday hunting that we can, and eventually try to, I'm sure the goal is to work toward getting Sunday hunting, but right now we're limited by those 3 Sundays, and that's what the legislature will give us right now.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, it's yeah, you're trying to manage, make management decisions about wildlife populations, and there's so many human factors. And yeah,
Deer management is never boring.
yeah, it doesn't sound like it. Okay, so final question here. This one's pretty wild. I actually Googled it because I had never heard of this, and I'm kind of wish I didn't hear of it now, but this is from David Stansberry here. I guess to both of y'all, do you have any thoughts yet on emerging studies regarding white-tailed deer susceptibility and contraction of SARS-CoV-2, that's COVID, and potential implications for annual harvest? So I Googled that because I hadn't heard, and not to just kind of share the news articles I'm reading here, but it looks like it spreads pretty rapidly through deer populations, and about 40%, I think I saw somewhere, but a very high percent at a Penn State study had antibodies to COVID. So do either of y'all have comments on that?
Go ahead, Brett. You want to go first? Since
it's very curious to me that so many were tested positive. I don't have answers as to why that occurred, and how things are how it's being transmitted. Basically, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned here. This first broke the news about a month ago when USDA did some of this work as well. They were actually deer that they were taken on sharpshooting programs in Pennsylvania, and I forget a couple other states, but they found similar results. And then this Penn State, Iowa press release came out today, I guess, or yesterday, is making the rounds. And one of the important things is it's the antibodies, so they're exposed to it. They haven't detected actual live virus, although I don't know if they've looked for it. But they are detecting antibodies, which means the deer were exposed to it. We are working with University of Georgia. They have a Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study, and there's numerous other, Penn State, there's numerous other research being done on this. So hopefully we'll learn more fairly quickly. Health implication wise, I don't know from a human standpoint what it means. I think obviously if we encourage our hunters to be safe anyways, wear gloves, and be sanitary. So I think as a first step, avoiding lungs, avoiding the respiratory tract probably would be a safe bet. I don't think, just doing your normal deer handling and processing is going to put you at an extreme risk of contracting COVID from a deer. And likewise, I can't believe there's been any kind of mass die off or issues with deer in COVID, because otherwise we would be getting reports of dead deer. Hemorrhagic disease in deer, for blue tongue, for those of you that might know it as blue tongue, when we have a die off from blue tongue, our phones ring off the hook, people finding dead deer. So if we had any kind of mass mortality event from COVID in deer, I certainly think by now we would have figured that out. So I think probably the bigger concern is the human implication. And again, I think probably some basic safety precautions, and we'll probably hopefully be okay. But again, there's a lot to learn for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's I had first I heard it, pretty crazy stuff.
USDA, it made the news. It was pretty big news about a month ago when USDA released their findings, and then like I said, just within the last couple of days, Penn State released their findings. So, and that's even been picked up broader than what the USDA study was, I think.
Gotcha. But I think there's just so much to learn with zoonotic diseases anyway, and we're just kind of this is why we need more scientists.
There is going to be and there, like I said, there is more research gearing up, and I'm thinking we're probably going to test in Maryland. It's not been finalized yet, but we're probably going to participate and test in Maryland. Look for it in Maryland, I would imagine. So at some point here coming up.
Excellent. Well, hey, one thing for everybody to tune in. So follow DNR, follow the Game Commission, stay in touch with all these guys. I am gonna share a couple more slides here to shut things down. But thank you so much to both of you. That was both fantastic presentations. I have loved every single one of these. This has been a really wonderful forum here. So if you would like to follow along with any more Alliance stuff, I recommend you do. So this is actually our watershed forum is now over, so too late. So you'll have to catch it next year. It's usually around that time, end of October, early November every year. And we do have the Wild and Scenic Film Fest, which is this bundle of a bunch of short films on nature, and it's pretty cool. So that is January 13th. Put it on your calendars. Yeah, thanks so much. If you'd like to learn more about the Alliance, recommend tuning in. This is a new kind of landing page that we have, really focused on kind of our impact, and then the impact that our kind of community who supports us is adding with us as well. So there we go, alliancetothebay.org/yourimpact. But again, thanks everybody for joining, and thank you so much to our speakers, Brian and Bret. Really appreciate it, guys. Especially to take time during deer season here to sit in the evening with us instead of out in a tree. So I really appreciate it immensely. And I know we're all giving you a hand from home. So
well,
thanks everybody.
Thank you all for attending and not being in a tree tonight either. So
Yep. Thank you for joining, and it's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. All right. Take care, everybody. Be well. Thanks.
yeah.
Bye now.